Okay, let's get started. So hello everyone, welcome to this Ask Me Anything about releases and deployments with the delivery team. I'm Amy Phillips, engineering manager with delivery, and we're also joined by quite a lot, hopefully most of the delivery team as well. So has anybody got any questions they'd like to kick us off with?
Thanks for organizing this. If no one else has a question, I think the releases and deployments, this is not about distribution. This is about like releasing to GitLab.com.
That's right, yes.
Cool, thanks for that context, appreciate it. Maybe the question is, in some far future, if you merge something as a maintainer, is it going to get released to GitLab.com immediately? Are we going to say, like, look, when the sun is over the Pacific, we have very few team members who are awake. We're just going to hold those releases out until it's there? Or are we going to say, look, because few team members are awake at that time, there will be few mergers, so it's not a problem?
That's a great question. So I think certainly the way we're thinking about releases right now is we are working through, so at the moment, release managers play a very important role in releasing. It's manual, there are manual steps in the process, and they are crucially doing the kind of manual promotion out to production. And we're working at the moment to put in place kind of assisted deployment, which takes away a lot of those manual steps, but and sort of provides release managers with lots more information, but there'll still be a manual promotion to production. And eventually we'll get to the stage where that becomes automated once we have kind of full confidence in the process. At least in the very, in the future that we can see so far, that will take place. It will be an automated deployment, but during a window, like an approved window. The approved window will be when we have a release manager online who can be responding if something goes wrong. So I think we are probably a very long way away from wanting to either expand the release managers to all regions or release when we don't have a release manager available. At some point, things will, I guess, become so reliable that would be safe, and we could, I guess, switch to like PagerDuty if it goes wrong, but that's a very, very long way out. So I think the focus at the moment would be on moving to automated deployment, but during approved windows. So we have release managers, we pair up, and we have a EMEA time zone and also a America's time zone. So we can deploy through quite a lot of the day. And then it's just the APAC region we don't currently cover. But as you say, right now, there's actually not so many changes coming in that time. So it's a little bit less impact.
Thanks for that. And maybe I have this assumption that it's possible to release individual changes, but I could even imagine that we have, like, at peak hours, we have kind of more merges happening than that we can do releases. Suppose we have, I don't know, 50 merges on a day, then you'd have only half an hour per release, and maybe the release even takes longer than that. How should I think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's, I think seeing the number of changes that come in, and even with the fastest pipeline, I think we will struggle because of the size we are and the number of changes. I don't think we could ever be in a place where one change would have its own deployment. I think we'll always have batches, but we are working to make the releases as fast as possible so that batch size does come down. At the moment, it takes around 6 hours to run the full pipeline. Yeah, we have a lot of changes. Like, we have to go through staging. So we deploy to staging, and we have to deploy to Canary. And then we wait on Canary for an hour with just a limited set of traffic to detect errors. And if that goes well, we start deploying to production. And that takes about 2 hours. So there's lots of room to improve that. we have worked really closely with quality to sort of speed up, like how can we speed up the tests that we're running. The work we're doing to migrate to Kubernetes, that will give us huge gains. It's much, much faster to deploy onto Kubernetes than it is onto our virtual machines. We'll get huge gains there as well. But we're never going to have a deployment pipeline that's 20 minutes. Like, you know, I think that's a real big goal. So I think what we'll focus on instead is moving. So at the moment we are deploying, we usually manage a couple of deployments on GitLab.com each day. And that's giving us a MTTP, a mean time to production, I should say, of around 19 hours. So that means an MR being merged in 19 hours, it will be on GitLab.com. So we've just changed that target. We're going to reduce that down to 12 hours. So that should mean that, you know, all MRs get merged within 12 hours, you'll hit production once we get to our target. So that's our current focus. And then we'll see where we can reduce that further. So I think eventually the goal would be, it's just a kind of continual cycle, and changes are just continually rolling out to production, but safely.
Thanks for that. And I think it's maybe important to like make the distinction between like transit time and interval time. Like, although the transit time is now 6 hours, we can do multiple a day because the interval time between changes maybe is smaller. Am I understanding that correctly?
I can add some color to that if you're okay with that, Amy.
Yeah, please do.
So you're right, Sid, absolutely right there. Our current time to actually be ready to deploy even is around 4 hours. And that time is the time that we don't fully control. So for example, it might take an hour and a half for a full test suite to finish inside of GitLab or GitLab. So I would add to Amy's comment about we will never get to deploy commit to production and correct it with, we might be able to do that once we actually get to the point where the full test suite runs in 5 minutes, for example. That would speed up things significantly and reduce the transit time. And then we are talking about the next stage, which is building the actual deployment artifact, whether that's Omnibus or whether that's Kubernetes deployment. That will also need to be reduced significantly. Right now, it takes around an hour and a half to build container images, right? Because they're big, like it takes a lot of time to get them done. So for us to be actually ready to deploy, it takes a significant chunk of time that we need to address first. And at this point in time, I'm not really sure whether that is the most important part, right? Right now, it's the most important part is to get confidence that we can get things done within 6 hours continuously, right? Once we get there, I think we can then start talking about those small details. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps. Is it okay for me to give some context about merge trains for 3 minutes? Thanks for that. I recognize that none of this is relevant to the work you're doing today. You're doing great work. Keep it going. This has nothing to do with that. I think with merge trains, we are able to maybe give some context. Merge trains originated because I was talking to one of like the biggest startups in the world. And they said, look, we have one iOS app. We got hundreds of developers working on hundreds of changes a day. And our test suite takes more time to run than that we have time in between changes. And it decouples that problem. You can have a very long transit time. Suppose your test chain, or like in your case, your release train takes like the 6 hours that you say. You could still kind of have, I don't know, half an hour in between releases. And that's how that works with being half an hour on staging. I don't exactly know, maybe you need multiple staging environments or something like that, but the time in between releases can be shorter than the time that tests take. And that's the whole concept of merge trains. We kind of anticipate the order in which they will go up. You test them like that. So theoretically, there could be a future. If you have a change in hand, it takes a full workday to get that online, but we can do that every 2 minutes. Like the time between two changes is only 2 minutes. So we can deploy individual changes. And I haven't found good words. I'm using transit time and interval time between the metros or trains. I'm not sure that's the right nomenclature, but I want to offer kind of what we learned in merge trains there, and maybe in some far future it will be useful in releasing.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that context. And this will all become more interesting as well as we move into Kubernetes, because that also gives us great tools to change our, it won't be so much just a pipeline that we run through. It gives us lots more options to spin things up with new versions and run percentage of traffic. And if they're good, we switch more traffic into that cluster and take another cluster out. So we get we have the option of having a different model once we move further down that path.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And that's something that, for example, the Spinnaker supports really well, having multiple changes out there at the same point, at the same time. I think in GitLab releases, that's not natural yet, as far as I understood the latest state of things. So that's something we should start thinking about on the product side, maybe.
We have some conversation about this, about being able to run your change set plus the current master on a subset of production. So we delayed this a bit because actually it will be easier once we have Kubernetes ready, because the idea is that, like Canary, which is a special stage of production, we can have named stages based on your merge request ID. And so that in order to get merged to master, let's say your merge request ID have to take 10% of traffic, of production, real traffic, for a reasonable amount of time and show no new errors, and then you can get merged. And this will allow us to isolate, get closer to deploying just the single commit. Yeah, this changes, because even if it's just a subset of the production environment, it's still testing that thing and then eventually merge it and batch everything so that we can do a bigger rollout later on in the day.
Thanks. I kind of want to propose the 4 stages of canarying. You have no canary. You have one canary environment where you can test one change. You have multiple ones where you can have, you can test change A, change B, change C, no change, so multiple ones. And then the final level, the ultimate level in GitLab tiering is the canary train. Similar to a merge train, you have one canary environment that is no changes, then one is A, then one is A plus B, one is A plus B plus C, etc. Just like you have a merge train. And that will allow you to have all of the changes go from like 1% deployment to 100% deployment as you go along, because that is not possible if you have multiple canary environments that each only support one change compared to the current state. And I think that's, I'm pretty sure that's not supported in our product yet. And I think Spinnaker does a better job. I'm not sure Spinnaker does multiple ones or whether they do a canary train. I think our product does one canary and they do multiple canaries. And we probably need to go to a canary train.
Yeah, interesting idea. Yeah, that would, it would certainly allow a lot more thorough testing. So yeah, that's a really good one. Great. Are there any other questions?
At the risk of breaking the silence here, is there anything in particular of the oncoming OpenShift operator work that is of particular interest to how this team will handle releases in the future?
Thank you for breaking silence. That's a great question. Does anybody in delivery like to step in and say,
I'm not familiar with the OpenShift work, so I don't know.
Don't worry about it specifically being OpenShift. Let me rephrase OpenShift to actually just say operator. The concept of the operator itself. Right now, you're currently making use of the Helm charts and thus Helm files to orchestrate those environments. When the operator becomes an option, we're going to rely on some of your own insight to populate its capabilities when it comes to day two operations. Is there anything in managing the versions of that and how to do rolling patterns for that that's particular interest to take off your plate because we'll be able to automate it?
I have a question about this. So will the operator allow us to inject logic so that we can, because one of the problems that we have now that we are working on assisted deployment and assisted rollback is actually checking the status of the production environment during the deployment. So with the omnibus, we have the fleet, which is broken down in service, and each service is broken down in batches. So it's easy at the end of each batch, you verify the status of your metrics. So you kind of, you may spot something before you have a complete rollout. This is a problem for the Helm chart in the current state, because basically we have less control there. We just trigger the Kate's workload and Helms do the magic. So next check is either he completed the deployment or decided to roll back, but we have nothing to say in between, right? We cannot stop Helm. So will this be possible with the operator?
I lost track of the unmute button for a second. That's a really interesting question. I don't believe it's specifically not possible, but it's not specifically possible yet either. It's very early in that particular function of design. Huh.
Yeah, would be useful to being able to inject checking logic so that when you do the gradual rollout, say check also this, and eventually roll back.
See, that's the kind of information that's going to provide a lot of use for us from your own team, so that we can make sure that, one, we're meeting the needs of our own, but also provide a lot of value from the operator itself for the customers.
Great, and thanks for asking that. Are there any other questions? No? Okay. In which case, thanks everyone for coming along. Thanks Sid, Jason for questions. And I think that was a really interesting conversation. So thanks a lot. Bye everyone.